My name is Karen, and I am the CEO of one of the most successful companies in our city, which, of course, is a source of pride for me, but at the same time it imposes on me a huge responsibility, from which sometimes I cannot relax even at home. I've been married to Louis for 3 years now, and although our marriage seems solid and stable, we both don't manage to devote as much time to each other as we would like, because our work literally consumes us, leaving only rare moments for personal communication. Perhaps that's why we still don't have children, not because we don't want them, but because our lives are designed in such a way that even weekends, which should be an opportunity to relax, often turn into an endless race for new goals and achievements. We spend most of our time traveling, meeting, negotiating, and sometimes the only time we cross paths is late at night, when one of us returns home first and finds the other already asleep. Sometimes it seems to me that we have become two parallel lines that exist side by side, but do not have an intersection point, and that is why we had to plan in advance at least rare joint trips so that once a year, even for a short time, we had the opportunity to escape from everything and feel like not just business partners, but spouses again. These trips abroad have become our salvation, the only oasis in the endless, rapidly rushing time when we can exhale, look back and remember that first of all we are people who love each other, and not just two ambitious professionals living under the same roof. The roof, by the way, is very expensive. When we got married, we made, at first glance, a risky, but, as it turned out, the right decision, to invest in buying an apartment on the top floor of one of the high-rise towers in the Bay Area. Of course, this required huge financial efforts, months of calculations and the abandonment of many other things, but we understood that the value of real estate in this area would only grow, which means that in the future it would become one of our best investments. I will not hide that it was not easy for us. Intense months of planning, numerous commitments, compromises, but now, after a while, we are happy with what we have. This house has become not only a place where we sleep and wake up, but also a symbol of our work, our efforts, and our journey together. My close friend Amelia, whom I've known since high school, has always played an important role in my life, and despite our workload, we try to meet sometimes, at least for lunch, to discuss the latest news. Amelia has always been a woman with high standards, especially when it came to men. Her requirements for potential partners were so strict that sometimes I doubted if she would find someone who really meets them. Education, income, and status always mattered to her, and she spent long hours on dating apps, looking for the few candidates who met her criteria. One day, during one of our dinners in a cozy cafe near the park, she suddenly announced that she would like to visit my apartment. It was a bit unexpected, because she had never shown much interest in our apartment before, but I did not object and invited her to the next weekend. When that day came, Amelia appeared at the entrance to our apartment complex, and even through the intercom, there was surprise in her voice. Well, Karen, I never imagined that you had such a house," she exclaimed when the elevator finally lifted her to our floor and I opened the door for her. I watched with a smile as she looked around, literally devouring the space around her. Her eyes were sparkling, and there was an expression of admiration on her face that she didn't even try to hide. "Wow. This place looks like a mansion," she drawled, stepping inside. "To be honest, I expected you to be beautiful, but it's even more spacious than the house." I smiled faintly. I had already heard this from the guests, but it was interesting to watch Amelia, who couldn't seem to get enough of what she saw. She walked around the living room, still turning her head, and stood at the huge panoramic windows, which offered a breathtaking view of the city. "The view is simply incredible. It's really impressive." There was genuine envy in her voice, but I tried to ignore it. However, when she turned to me with shining eyes, I suddenly noticed something in her tone that made me think. "Great location, top floor. It must have cost a fortune," she said, giving me an appraising look. I laughed, trying to make the situation less awkward. "It's like $1 million apartment," I joked. But Amelia immediately caught the gist of what was said. Her eyes flashed. "$1 million. Your husband must earn a lot," she said, not hiding her amazement. I felt something tremble inside me. Amelia has always shown an increased interest in the incomes of others, but this time I did not like her tone. There was something in it that could hardly be called just admiration. Yes, Louis has a good salary, especially for his age, I replied cautiously, not wanting to pursue the subject. But it seems my caution has not gone unnoticed. Something like an ulterior motive flashed in her gaze, but she quickly turned away, and as if changing the subject, she suddenly asked, "May I use your bathroom?" This unexpected transition alarmed me, but I nodded and showed her the way. She disappeared through the door, and I went to the kitchen to make tea. However, as I carefully stirred the sugar with a spoon, a strange uneasiness flared up inside me. Why did Amelia want to see my house today? Why was she so interested in Louis's income? I didn't know, but the feeling of anxiety had already settled somewhere deep inside. I forced myself to smile, although I still felt an unpleasant aftertaste inside, as if someone else's hands had invaded my personal space, touched things without asking, which were not just objects, but a part of me, my history, my memories. Amelia smiled too, but there was something strange in her eyes, almost a challenge, as if she was testing the boundaries of what was allowed, trying to figure out how far I could go before I really got angry. "Oh, Karen, you know I'm just kidding," she drawled, casually taking off the necklace and placing it on the coffee table as if it were a cheap, knick-knack accessory and not something Louis had given me for my anniversary. "You have so many beautiful things that I just couldn't resist. It's like being in a luxury museum." I grinned, but I answered more dryly, "Amelia, there's a difference between admiring and invading someone else's life. It's not like I'm looking into your handbags or trying on your dresses without asking." She made a hurt face, but I knew it was just a game. Amelia had never liked being caught doing anything questionable. She always knew how to get out of it, pretend that nothing terrible had happened, and easily switch the conversation in a direction that was convenient for her. "That's enough," she said, slapping me on the shoulder and smiling coquettishly. "You'd better tell me when Louis gets here. You said he could come early, right?" This question sounded too impatient, and I didn't like it. I nodded, pretending that I hadn't noticed anything strange, even though I had a nagging feeling inside me again. "Yes, he's on his way," I replied, glancing at the phone. "He'll be here in about 20 minutes, I think." "Great." She perked up, brushing invisible specks of dust from her dress. "I haven't seen him for so long, he's probably become even more attractive." This phrase made me tense up. I'm not jealous by nature, but there was something in her voice. "That's not it. It's just too much interest." I couldn't say exactly what hurt me, maybe the slight smile at the corners of her lips, maybe the sparkle in her eyes, but something inside me protested. I forced myself not to react. After all, Amelia has always loved to attract the attention of men, but it's just her style of communication, nothing more. Isn't that right? At that moment, the sound of the front door opening was heard. Louis came in, brushing raindrops off his jacket, which had apparently just started outside. His dark hair was slightly disheveled from the wind, and there was a slight weariness in his eyes after a long day at work. "Oh, you're early," I said, walking up to him and touching his arm. "I tried to get out early," he replied with a warm smile, and then noticed Amelia. "Oh, hello, Amelia. Long time no see." Amelia literally burst out with joy, instantly changing her expression to the most radiant. She came closer, as if she hadn't heard my words, and, tilting her head to the side, said, "Louis. Finally, it's been so long. As always, you look absolutely gorgeous." I watched her with my arms crossed over my chest, trying to determine if there was more to her behavior than just the joy of meeting. Her voice was too gentle, her gaze was too attentive, and her movements were too graceful. "How are you?" Louis asked, giving me a quick glance as if checking to make sure everything was okay. "Oh, great," Amelia drawled, twirling a curl around her finger. "I was just telling Karen that I met an interesting person, a doctor. A very promising man, smart, wealthy. Well, you know me, I won't settle for anything less. Louis chuckled, and I exhaled inwardly. At least she switched to another topic. I'm glad to hear that you're doing well, he replied politely. I moved closer to him, squeezing his hand a little harder, and immediately felt Amelia's gaze slide over our hands. She looked at our intertwined fingers for a moment, and then she smiled again, but her smile no longer seemed so innocent to me. Karen, can I have some more tea? What is it? She asked, rising from her seat. Of course, I replied, not taking my eyes off her. She went into the kitchen, and I noticed Louis frowning slightly. He felt something too. Is everything okay? What is it? He asked softly, leaning toward me. Yes, it's just that Amelia is a little weird today, I replied just as quietly. Do you want her to leave? I thought about it. I've known Amelia for too long not to realize that if I say something outright, she'll make a drama out of it and then accuse me of taking things too seriously. Not yet, I replied. But I want to understand what she wants. Louis nodded. When Amelia returned with a cup of tea, she looked as if nothing had happened. I just love this variety, she said, taking a sip. Karen, you always choose the best. I smiled, but it was a forced smile. Of course. My taste is expensive, I replied. She laughed, but there was that strange, appraising twinkle in her eyes again. I pretended I hadn't noticed, but I already had a feeling that tonight was going to be a lot more difficult than I thought. I tried not to look at the screen, not to open the messages, not to read every mocking phrase, but this only made them sound louder in my head, repeating over and over again, like a malicious whisper in the dark, which it is impossible to get rid of. Their happy faces, her smirk, his arms hugging her waist, expensive restaurants, country trips, they literally savored their happiness, savored my pain, flaunting their perfect life as if it wasn't enough for them to just betray me. They needed to make it a spectacle, a performance in which I was humiliated, rejected, unnecessary. I couldn't sleep. Sleepless nights gave way to days full of silence that pierced my heart, loneliness that filled every corner of my house, turning it into an empty, lifeless shell. I stopped eating, stopped going out, stopped answering my friends' calls, because I was ashamed to admit that my life had collapsed, that the person I shared every day with had suddenly ceased to be a part of my world, that the friend I trusted had stolen it from me so easily, so coolly that it seemed almost unreal. I was thinking about what I should do next. I couldn't just sit and watch them build their lives on the ruins of mine. It was unfair, it was cruel. Deep down, I knew that the only thing left for me was to leave, erase them from my life, start over. But how? How do I take this step if every reminder of the past causes me such unbearable pain? One evening, when I was looking through their photos again, buried in a blanket and clutching a mug of iced tea, I received a new message from Amelia. It was short, but it contained everything she wanted to say, everything she had sent me these pictures for. You still haven't signed the papers. Hurry up, Karen, Louis and I have plans for the future. Don't keep us waiting. My fingers trembled as I read these words. Something inside me broke completely. I couldn't stay in this pain anymore, in this constant feeling of humiliation. I couldn't let her mock me anymore. I couldn't let him just walk away, taking everything we had with him. I stood up, feeling something new rise in me, something strong, unshakable. I went to the table where the divorce papers were still lying, picked up a pen and, without hesitating for another second, put my signature. Every movement was steeped in rage, but at the same time it was liberating, as if a weight that I had been carrying all this time had been lifted from me. But I wasn't going to stop there. If Amelia thought she could just take my husband away from me and go unpunished, if she thought I would swallow it in silence, she was very wrong. I wasn't ready for revenge, but I was ready for the truth. And the truth is that people who betray so easily face the consequences sooner or later. I opened my laptop and started typing. Amelia exhaled sharply, giving me a look full of hatred and contempt. as if I were an insignificant obstacle to her happiness, which she wanted to sweep away in one motion. Her fingers nervously clenched into a fist, her nails dug into her palm, but probably the realization that any rash action would only make the situation worse made her freeze in place, though trembling with anger. Louis stood next to her, his shoulders tense, and an expression of dull annoyance froze on his face, but in his eyes I saw something more: uncertainty, fear of what was about to happen, of the inevitability of the reckoning that had finally overtaken them. I was in no hurry to start a conversation, giving them time to realize the situation they were in. The silence that hung in the office was thick and oppressive. It enveloped us like a thick fog, in which each new sound seemed like a thunderous echo. Finally, I slowly straightened up, crossed my arms over my chest, and calmly said, "I see you're eager to get down to business. Well, let's not waste any time." My words came out evenly, without trembling, without a hint of weakness, and I saw Louis tense slightly, and Amelia curled her lips, as if she was ready to pounce on me again. "What do you want, Karen?" "What is it?" he asked abruptly, his voice taut as a string, exasperation evident in it, but also a kind of pleading, as if he already knew in advance that I would not just leave it like that. "Are you really asking?" I grinned, shaking my head. "Do you think that after everything you've done, I'll just walk away and forget? You stole years of my life, Louis. And you, Amelia," I looked at her, and she shuddered, "betrayed me in a way that only the meanest person betrays. And you both think you can just keep living your sweet lives without looking back." "Oh, enough of this drama already," Amelia snorted, folding her arms over her chest. "Did you sign the papers? That's fine. You're not bothering us anymore, so you can just disappear from our lives." I felt anger flare up in me, but I didn't let it get out. Instead, I smiled, calmly, confidently, so that Amelia recoiled slightly. "Disappear?" I repeated, bowing my head slightly. "No, dear. I'm just getting started." Louis exhaled heavily, ran a hand over his face, and seemed to be trying to be reasonable for the first time in a long time. "Karen," he began, "I understand that you're hurting, but—" "No, you don't understand," I interrupted him in a cold voice. "If you did, you wouldn't do this. You wouldn't have cheated on me for months, you wouldn't have taken Amelia to our house, you wouldn't have let her pretend to be my friend while you were building a new life with her behind my back. If you understood anything at all, you would be sitting here right now with remorse, and not with this pathetic expression of an irritated person who is just uncomfortable." Louis gritted his teeth but said nothing, but Amelia couldn't help herself. "What do you want?" she exclaimed, waving her arms. "Revenge? Do you want to ruin our lives?" "I want justice," I replied firmly. The lawyer, who had remained silent until that moment, waited for a pause and, catching the moment when the passion subsided a little, spread out the papers in front of him. "Let's get down to business," he said in a calm, businesslike tone. "According to your prenuptial agreement, Louis is obliged to pay Karen a significant amount of compensation, since the marriage was terminated on his initiative and on the basis of his infidelity. Besides, there's another case, the theft of Karen's personal belongings." He looked up at Amelia. "Ms. Hart, we have evidence that some items belonging to Mrs. Bailey were found in your possession." Amelia froze. Her eyes widened and her lips parted, but she couldn't get a word out. "What?" she hissed, turning to Louis, but he also looked dumbfounded. "This is nonsense." "Oh, really?" I tilted my head, watching a slight shadow of fear cross her face. "Surveillance cameras, evidence from neighbors. Do you think I'm not prepared?" Amelia shot me a nasty look, but now there was something else in it: confusion, uncertainty. "This is some kind of setup," she snapped. "Of course," I grinned, crossing my arms. "Everything is against you. The world is unfair. You know, Amelia, your problem is that you're too sure of your own impunity. You're so used to getting everything you want with someone else's hands that you haven't even thought about the consequences. Louis lowered his head, his fingers gripping the edge of the table. He seems to have finally realized that the situation goes far beyond the usual divorce. The lawyer coughed again, drawing attention. Gentlemen, I suggest that you discuss the terms of the conflict settlement. If you agree to the proposed compensation measures, the case will not go to court. And if we disagree? Amelia asked sharply, narrowing her eyes. I smiled. Then I'll see you in court, I replied calmly. Silence. Louis rubbed his temples nervously, while Amelia looked at me as if she was ready to tear me apart right here and now. We need time to think, he finally managed. You have 3 days, the lawyer said firmly. I got up, took the documents and headed for the exit without turning around. Behind me, I heard Amelia's muffled exclamation, her hissing, but I wasn't listening anymore. When I went outside, cool air rushed into my lungs, and I suddenly felt like I was breathing deeply for the first time in a long time. I knew it wasn't over yet, but I wasn't a victim anymore. I was the one who kept the situation under control. Amelia was sitting across from me, batting her eyelashes in confusion, as if trying to convince herself that everything that was happening was just a bad dream, a ridiculous mistake that someone was about to fix, undo, and return her to her familiar world, where she could manipulate people with impunity, play with feelings, and get what she wanted without the slightest difficulty. Her hands were shaking, her lips were pressed tightly together, and panic was visible in her eyes. For the first time in all this time, she truly realized that her illusion of well-being had crumbled to dust, and there was no longer a single lie she could cling to. Louis was still sitting with his face in his hands, unable to meet my eyes, and his silence seemed to speak louder than any words. He no longer looked like the self-confident, calculating man who had once tricked me, trampled on my trust, and easily stepped over everything that connected us. No, now I was looking at a broken man who had lost control of his own life, a man who realized that his lies had turned against him, destroying not only his reputation, but also his only chance at a new life with Amelia. You planned all this, didn't you? Her voice was trembling, there was still anger in it, but there was no longer the arrogance with which she had spoken before. I raised my eyebrows a little, cocking my head to the side, as if surprised at her cleverness. Planned it? I grinned at him. No, Amelia, it wasn't an elaborate revenge plan. Everything that has happened is just the natural consequences of your own decisions. You laid the foundation for this collapse yourself. She opened her mouth to say something, but then snapped it shut, as if realizing that any words would be powerless. You didn't tell me anything, she suddenly whispered, looking at me with eyes full of despair. I thought we were friends. I nodded slowly. Yes, I thought so too, I replied calmly. But true friends don't betray. There was silence in the room again, tense, oppressive, unbearable. Amelia glanced at Louis, as if hoping to find some kind of support in him, but he was still hunched over, clutching his temples with his fingers, as if hoping that if he closed his eyes, it would all disappear. You said you'd provide for us. Her voice broke, and she shook her head as if trying to clear it of bad thoughts. Louis shuddered, as if waking up, raised his head and finally looked at her. His face was pale, his eyes were dull, his lips compressed into a thin line. I didn't say we were going to live off me, he muttered. I thought that everything would be settled, that I would find a way. Will you find a way? Amelia's voice rose to a screech. You said you make millions. That you're the president. And now it turns out that you have nothing? Not really, he said hoarsely. I have a duty. These words hung in the air like heavy lead weights. Amelia blinked, clearly not immediately understanding the meaning of what was said. A debt? What is it? She asked, her face contorted into a grimace of horror. Yes, he replied dully, without looking up. I took the money. A lot of money. I was hoping to invest, double, triple, but it didn't turn out the way I planned. He swallowed hard, as if he couldn't believe he was saying those words out loud. Amelia jumped to her feet, her face flushed with rage. You mean we don't have anything? I looked at them without interfering. It wasn't about me anymore. It was their personal hell, which they created with their own hands. Did you think that he really earns millions? I couldn't help but sneer. Are you really that naive, Amelia? She turned abruptly to me, and I saw in her eyes not only hatred, but also despair. It's your fault. Stop it, she screamed, her hands clenching into fists. You deliberately set everything up to destroy us. No, I shook my head. You have destroyed yourself. I stood up smoothly and confidently, like a person who has made all the decisions for a long time and is now just watching his will being fulfilled. My lawyer will contact you, I said in a flat voice, picking up my bag. And, Louis, don't forget, the house belongs to me. I don't think you should stay here too long. He closed his eyes, as if those words had dealt him the final blow. Amelia looked at me, breathing heavily, her chest heaving with emotion, but she was no longer screaming. I headed for the door, feeling my breathing get easier with every step. I thought that this day would be hard, that it would hurt me to see them like this, pathetic, broken, full of despair. But to my surprise, I didn't feel any pain or regret. I only felt freedom. Amelia looked around in confusion, as if hoping to find at least some kind of support, at least one way out of the trap into which she had driven herself. Her hands were clenching into fists, her breathing was coming in short gasps, and her face was turning unhealthily pale, as if the realization of what was happening had hit her with all its destructive power. Louis, who had seemed broken a moment ago, now looked at her in surprise, like a man who suddenly realized that the woman next to him was not the woman he thought she was. He slowly raised his head, his reddened eyes had difficulty focusing, but there was shock mixed with disgust in them. Did you really steal? His voice was hoarse, as if saying those words was painful for him. Amelia jerked, gave him a quick look full of panic, then looked back at me, at my lawyer, at the tablet with the video recording, which has already become irrefutable proof of her crime. She opened her mouth as if about to say something, but then abruptly stopped, realizing that any words would only make her situation worse. I just took what I needed, she finally gasped, her voice dropping to a plaintive whisper. Got it? My lawyer asked, raising an eyebrow. Are you saying that you just went into someone else's house, took advantage of other people's things and don't see anything wrong with it? Amelia bit her lip, abruptly turned away, but my lawyer wasn't going to stop. Moreover, he continued, easily turning a page in the document folder, we have evidence that you repeatedly used Louis' credit card without his knowledge, as well as... That's enough. Louis suddenly exploded, his voice, broken and hoarse, sounding unexpectedly harsh. Amelia shuddered and turned sharply to him, as if not believing that he really dared to contradict her. Louis, her voice became pleading, and she held out her arms to him, as if hoping to touch him, to convince him that this was all just a terrible misunderstanding. But he pulled away. I don't want to hear this, he shook his head, his shoulders hunched, and his face looked tired and aged. God, I've been justifying you all this time, closing my eyes, convincing myself that you're not like that. I'm not like that. Amelia screamed, her voice filled with hysteria. Louis, I loved you. Loved you? He smiled bitterly, lowering his head. Amelia froze, her breathing quickened, her eyes darted around the room as if looking for salvation. I wasn't going to. She started to speak, but I interrupted her, remaining coolly calm. You weren't going to. My lips curled into a grin. But I did it anyway. She turned to me, and hatred flashed in her eyes. It's you. She spat out, standing up abruptly. You've ruined everything. I held her gaze, calmly, confidently, knowing that now in front of me stands a man who has cornered himself, but is still desperately trying to blame someone else. No, Amelia, I said calmly, you ruined everything yourself. She froze, as if those words had robbed her of her last hope. Karen, Louis breathed softly, but I didn't let him finish. It doesn't matter anymore, I said, looking straight at him. Now you have a choice. Either you voluntarily leave this house and never appear in my life again, or I bring you both to criminal responsibility. Amelia gasped, but this time she couldn't find the strength to object. She saw that there was no escape anymore, no loopholes, no way out. Louis nodded slowly. I'll leave, he said, his voice hollow, as if from the depths of a well. Okay, I nodded, turning toward the door. Then I won't bring the case to court. Amelia screamed something incoherent, but I wasn't listening anymore. This conversation was over. When I left the room, leaving them alone with their ruined lives, I felt the weight that had been weighing on me all these years finally begin to dissipate. Amelia slowly lowered her trembling fingers. Her eyes darted around the room as if searching for a way out that did not exist. Her face turned pale, and her lips compressed into a thin, colorless line, while reality, harsh and inexorable, pressed down on her with all its weight, turning her pride, her defiant self-confidence into helpless as shadow hunched over under the weight of irreparable mistakes. Louis was standing next to her, but it seemed that he was no longer a part of this conversation. His figure, which until recently had seemed to her like a support, a reliable wall behind which to hide, now looked more like the disembodied silhouette of a man tired of fighting, disappointed in his own decisions and finally seeing that he had lost more than ever, or I could imagine. Amelia's voice was weak, almost soundless, like the rustle of paper thrown into a fire, but even it couldn't hide the vibration of despair permeating every letter, every sound, every failed hope. Louis, tell them we can work this out. But Louis was silent. He stared straight ahead, not focusing on me, the lawyer, or his wife, who now looked more like a broken puppet who had lost her master. His eyes reflected the inner struggle, but I could see how with every passing moment the last remnants of affection were crumbling inside him, the last crumbs of blind faith in the woman who stood before him, a woman who in just a few moments had turned from his companion into a criminal. Is that really true? He finally exhaled, but his question was not addressed to me, or to the lawyer, or even to Amelia. It was a question to himself, to his past, to the decisions that led him to this moment. I was silent. The lawyer just shrugged his shoulders slightly, pushing the folder of documents away from him, as if finally putting an end to this conversation. Damn, Louis ran his hand over his face, sighed heavily, his shoulders slumped, and fatigue appeared in his eyes, such as people who have just realized that their whole life has been a mistake. It's true, I said, calmly watching their reactions, seeing how the words fell on them like stones into a bottomless well, leaving no room for doubt. Your marriage was doomed from the start, Louis. It just took you 3 years to figure it out. Amelia turned to me abruptly, as if stung, her eyes blazing with anger, but with that anger there was panic in them, a feverish fear that her life was falling apart, and the control she was trying to keep was slipping through her fingers. You. She began, but I didn't let her finish. Don't you dare, I said calmly, but my voice sounded firm, like a stone hitting a stone, cutting through the air. Don't you dare accuse me of ruining your own life. She gasped, turned even paler, and her lips trembled, but I knew it wasn't anger that was raging inside her, but fear, the realization that there were no more tricks, manipulations, or escape routes that could get her out of the situation. What now? Louis asked softly, his voice sounding empty, lifeless. I looked at him, and I suddenly wondered if he was asking about his life. About your career? About your marriage? Or about what awaits Amelia? Now you decide for yourself, I said, folding my arms over my chest. You can leave everything behind, try to start from scratch. Or you can let her drag you back into the chaos. The choice is yours. Louis nodded slowly, but said nothing. He looked at Amelia for a long time, intently, as if trying to remember her as he saw her now, scared, hunted, exposed. I'm leaving, he finally said, and his voice sounded unexpectedly firm. Amelia wheezed as if her breath had been taken away, Her hands were shaking, tears flared in her eyes. No. Louis, wait, you can't. But he had already turned around, stepped to the door without looking back, and I knew it wasn't just a step out of the room, it was a step out of her life. I looked at Amelia, who now stood alone in front of me, broken, with a face distorted by tears and despair. It's time for you, I said, and my words sounded like a sentence. She looked at me, her lips parted, but no words came out. She knew that nothing could be changed. I turned around and walked to the exit, leaving her behind, leaving it all behind. I had nothing else to do here. I couldn't say that I was satisfied with how Amelia's fate turned out, because deep down there is always a shadow of doubt. Could everything have gone differently if she had made a different choice? If she had stopped earlier? If her thirst for an easy life hadn't overshadowed the voice of reason? If she hadn't overestimated your own strength and didn't underestimate the power of the consequences? However, regret is a useless feeling. It doesn't change anything. It doesn't erase past mistakes or correct past actions. It's just a reminder of how life could have turned out if the past had turned out differently. But the past doesn't change, and therefore the only thing left is to move on without looking back, without stuck in the swamp of thinking about what can't be fixed. Louis disappeared from my sight without writing, calling, or letting me know about himself, as if he had severed all the threads connecting him to his previous life with the move, and I probably couldn't blame him for that. This chapter was too painful for him, too full of disappointment, and now he needed silence, solitude, the opportunity to rebuild himself, without the shadows of the past, without the memories of the woman who had turned into his worst nightmare. Amelia is the same. I didn't follow her fate, but of course there were rumors. Someone said that she had appealed, hoping for a commutation of the sentence. Someone claimed that she had tried to manipulate the court by pretending to be remorseful, but her past machinations had played against her, exposing her not as a repentant victim of circumstances, but as a predator caught in a network. Her lawyer did everything possible to ease her situation, but the truth was that society rarely forgives those who have been playing with fire for too long and burn not only themselves, but also others. Having gotten rid of all this, I was finally able to return to a normal life, to a familiar routine that had previously seemed monotonous to me, but now it was perceived as a blessing, like a breath of fresh air after a long stay in a stuffy, lice-soaked room. I could go to work without fear that someone would break into my house in my absence. I could meet with friends without thinking about which of them would betray me next. I could wake up in the morning and feel that this day was mine, that I didn't need to deal with others. Solve problems, unravel the intricacies of intrigue, and sort through the rubble of other people's mistakes. But even in this new, peaceful life, shadows of the past appeared from time to time, reminding us that it does not go away without a trace. One day I received a letter, the envelope of which was crumpled, and the handwriting seemed hurried, as if the author was in a hurry to put all his thoughts on paper before they crumbled in a chaos of emotions. Karen, I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but maybe you're the only person who can understand me. I thought the world owed me everything: comfort, money, admiration, ease of life. But now I realize that nothing in this world is given for free. I've lost everything I had, and now the only thing I have left is time to reflect, to realize how stupidly I've been wasting my life chasing after something that never really belonged to me. I'm not asking for forgiveness, but if you could just answer, just once. Just to know that I still exist not only in police matters. I stared at these lines for a long time, experiencing mixed feelings. Was there real remorse in those words? Or was it just another attempt to cling to the past, to find another saving straw, clinging to someone else's kindness? I didn't know, and I probably never will. I put the letter in my desk drawer without answering. The past must remain in the past. Now that each of us has found ourselves on our own path, when the past has become only a shadow cast by the evening sun, and the future beckoned with its uncertainty, I realize that I no longer hold on to old fears and doubts. Do not look back, do not analyze mistakes, do not chew the memories that once deprived me of sleep. I just live by letting time do its thing, healing wounds, smoothing out wrinkles on my heart, filling me with confidence that every step, even the most painful, was necessary to bring me here, to this moment where I finally feel free. Lewis, despite all the trials that had befallen him, despite the despair that overwhelmed him in his darkest moments, despite a series of rejections, finally found a job, even if not the one he dreamed of, not the one that corresponded to his former status, but the one that gave him the opportunity to pull through. To stay afloat, to cling to reality, and not to drown in your own thoughts about how things could have turned out differently. He got a job at a warehouse. The work was hard, exhausting, leaving no room for reflection on the past, and perhaps this is what saved him, allowed him to focus on what he has here and now, and not on what he lost. I've heard that he's still single, that he avoids new acquaintances, as if he's afraid to repeat the mistake again, but maybe one day, when the scars on his soul stop aching from every move, he'll let someone back into his life. Amelia, on the other hand, was unable to break out of the vicious circle she found herself in. Her attempts to appeal the verdict failed, her connections and manipulations, which she so skillfully used, suddenly lost their power, and people who once looked at her with admiration now tried to stay away so as not to tarnish their name by associating with a criminal. I found out that in prison she found herself in complete isolation, not used to harsh realities, unable to adapt, and at some point she just broke down, lost her former bravado, her assumed brilliance, her confidence that she could get out of any situation. I didn't feel sorry for her, but I also didn't feel schadenfreude. Her fate was her choice, and she paid the price for it. And I lived. I built a business, finding in it not just a job, but also a passion, an opportunity to create, inspire, and leave my mark. I immersed myself in a new project dedicated to expanding our collection, and I returned to Switzerland over and over again, not only for the sake of contracts, but also for the sake of the man with whom I once shared that glass of wine in a cozy restaurant, a man who, with every conversation we had, became something more to me than just business partner. His voice was filled with warmth, his smile with sincerity, his gaze with understanding, and I couldn't help but think that maybe fate hadn't brought me here by accident. We began to see each other more often, first at meetings dedicated to discussing jewelry, then just like that, for no reason, just because we wanted to. He didn't ask about my past, he didn't ask about the divorce, about Lewis, about what I had to go through. He just accepted me for who I was, and there was something truly magical about it, something that made me feel alive, wanted, the real one. One evening, when we were walking through the streets of Zurich, breathing in the cool air filled with the aromas of coffee and fresh pastries, he suddenly stopped, took my hand, looked into my eyes so intently, so deeply, as if he saw in me something more than just a woman with whom it was pleasant to spend time. And he said softly, "Have you ever thought about the fact that sometimes life itself leads us to where we need to be?" I smiled, feeling a warm, aching feeling spreading inside me. "I think so." "Then maybe we should trust her." I didn't answer right away, just looked at him, realizing that, perhaps for the first time in a long time, I was ready not to analyze, not to be afraid, not to build walls between myself and happiness. That night, I realized that I had really let go of the past.